"I think we need space," she said calmly. I nodded, updated the prenup, shifted my investments quietly, and stepped back without drama. Months later, when her space became financial pressure, she realized distance costs more than commitment ever did in a marriage. "I think we need space." She said it the way someone orders coffee, calm, almost bored, like the words didn't carry 6 years of a shared life sitting right behind them. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just set my fork down slowly, folded my napkin exactly the way I always do, and said, "Okay." She blinked. I watched her eyes move across my face, searching for something. Panic, maybe, or at least a tremble in my jaw. She didn't find either. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it," I said. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying me like I was a document she'd misread. I picked my fork back up and finished the last of my dinner. She sat across the table staring at me for almost a full minute, and I let her stare. Because the truth is, I'd been quietly preparing for that conversation for almost 4 months. I knew something was shifting long before she said the words. You don't spend 6 years building a life with someone and then miss the signals when it starts coming apart at the seams. The late evenings out. The phone face down on the nightstand when it used to rest face up. The way she'd come home energized on nights she claimed were just dinner with Cassie, but she looked alive in a way that she hadn't looked around me in almost a year. I noticed. I always noticed. But noticing isn't the same as reacting, and I made a very deliberate choice not to react until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. So I watched. I paid attention, and I made some quiet, very careful decisions while she was busy putting distance between us. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. We'd been married for 5 years at that point, together for 6. I was 38, she was 34, and we lived in a 4-bedroom house in a suburb outside of Denver that I had put a substantial down payment on 3 years into our marriage. No kids yet. She'd wanted to wait until the timing felt right, and I'd respected that. I ran a mid-sized logistics consulting firm that I'd built from nothing over the previous decade. She worked in brand marketing for a lifestyle company, the kind of company that sends its employees to retreats in Sedona and calls burnout a misalignment of values. By the time she said those words across the dinner table, we had a combined lifestyle that most couples spend their whole lives trying to reach, and she wanted space from it. Fine. The next morning I sat in my car in the driveway for about 12 minutes before driving to work, not because I was falling apart, but because I was being very deliberate about the order of my next moves. I've run a business for over a decade. I've navigated market downturns, contract disputes, staff crises, and client losses. The one thing I've learned above every other thing is this: emotional reactions are expensive. The moment you let the emotion drive the car, you make decisions that cost you more than the original problem ever would have. So I sat in my car, let the feeling move through me. The weight of it, the dull ache of a night spent sleeping in a bed that had somehow gotten lonelier despite the fact that nothing had technically changed, and then I set it aside. I put the car in reverse and drove to the office, and I was the most focused I'd been in months. The next morning, she came downstairs to find me already dressed, coffee made, and my laptop open on the kitchen counter. She poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching me. "So we're not going to talk about last night?" she said. "We can talk," I said, not looking up. "What do you want to say?" She exhaled slowly, like I was being difficult. "I just feel like we've been going through the motions," she said. "Like we're roommates who share a mortgage." I looked up at her then. "You've felt that way for how long?" I asked. She hesitated. "A while. And this is the first I'm hearing about it," I said. It wasn't a question. She looked away. I didn't want to start a fight. I closed my laptop gently and gave her my full attention. "I'm not fighting with you," I said. "You want space." "I heard you." I said, "Okay. What does that look like to you specifically?" She seemed caught off guard by the directness. "I don't know yet," she said quietly. "All right," I said. "When you figure it out, let me know." I picked up my laptop and my coffee and went to my home office. I heard her stand in the kitchen for another few seconds before walking upstairs. And the moment I closed the office door, I picked up my phone and called my attorney. His name was Victor Kelman. He'd handled my business contracts for years and had set up my original prenuptial agreement before the wedding. She had known about the prenup. She hadn't been thrilled, but she'd signed it. At the time, it felt like an awkward formality between two people who were genuinely in love. Looking at it now, it felt like the smartest document I had ever put my signature on. I need you to look at the prenup again, I told Victor when he picked up. And I need to know what a postnuptial amendment would look like if we wanted to formalize some additional protections. Victor was quiet for a moment. Personal situation or precautionary? He asked. Precautionary, I said. For now. Come in Thursday, he said. I was there Thursday morning at 9. Victor's office is on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a view of the mountains. I've sat across from his desk maybe 40 times over the years. Business acquisitions, contract reviews, partnership disputes. But that morning felt different from all of them. Not heavier exactly, just more personal. He had the prenup printed and laid out on the desk before I even sat down. Walk me through what happened, he said first, not the legal situation, just what happened. Victor is old school. He believes context shapes documents, and he's right. I told him about October, about the patterns before October, about the 18 months of small withdrawals I had absorbed without saying a word. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always respected about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. How sure are you that this is headed toward dissolution? He said. I'm not sure of anything, I said. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He said. Preparation, I said. The same way I ensure a building I hope will never burn down. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Then let's look at what you have and what you need. The agreement was solid. It protected the business, most of my premarital assets, and had a reasonable clause around the house since I'd funded most of the down payment. But in the years since we'd signed it, things had grown more complicated. I'd built 2 additional investment portfolios. I'd quietly moved money into a family trust. The business had tripled in value. And in a divorce situation, some of the growth from joint marital years would be considered marital property in Colorado, depending on how the accounts were structured. Victor laid it out clearly. You're not in crisis territory, he said. But if this goes sideways in the next year, you want everything positioned correctly before it becomes a contested asset situation. What do I need to move? I asked. He handed me a list. I read it twice, folded it, and put it in my inside jacket pocket. How long does this take? I asked. 6 to 8 weeks if we move efficiently, he said. Start Monday, I said. He leaned back in his chair for a moment. You know, he said carefully, most men who come in here in your position are either furious or barely keeping it together. I know, I said. You're neither, he said. No, I said. Is that healthy? He asked. I smiled slightly at that. Probably not, I said. But it's useful. He laughed, a short, dry sound, and then picked up his pen. Monday, he confirmed. I didn't tell her any of this. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't doing anything illegal or deceptive. Every move Victor and I made was within the legal framework of Colorado marital property law. I wasn't hiding assets. I was restructuring them. There's a difference. And the difference matters because if she'd been willing to have an honest conversation, if she'd sat me down and said, I'm unhappy and I want to try to fix this, I would have stopped every single one of those steps immediately. But she didn't do that. She wanted space, and space is exactly what I gave her. Over the next 2 weeks, the new arrangement settled into something that almost resembled a routine. She moved her things into the guest room without announcing it. I didn't ask. She came and went on her own schedule. Some nights, she wasn't home until 11. Once she didn't come home until 2 in the morning, and I know this because I was awake, not because I was waiting by the door, but because I'd gotten up for water and noticed her car wasn't in the driveway. I went back to bed. I slept fine. That probably would have surprised her if she'd known. 3 weeks after the dinner table conversation, she approached me in the living room on a Sunday afternoon. She looked refreshed, tanned, actually, like she'd spent time outside. She'd started doing yoga with a new group on weekends. She'd mentioned Cassie's name about 4 times in the past 2 weeks, always in the same bright, breezy tone that she hadn't used around me in months. This is working, don't you think? She said. I looked up from the book I was reading. What is? I said. This, she said, gesturing vaguely at the air between us. The space. I feel so much lighter. I nodded slowly. Good, I said. She smiled at me. It was the most genuine smile she'd aimed at me in a long time, and the cruel irony was that it was because she felt free from me. You seem really calm about all of this, she said, almost like she was impressed. I am calm, I said. She tilted her head. Most men would be spiraling right now, she said. I'm not most men, I said, and went back to my book. She stood there a second longer, then went back upstairs. By week 5, Victor had completed the first round of restructuring. The investment portfolios had been separated cleanly. Two accounts that had been in both our names were now in a family trust that predated the marriage, with documentation to support the transfer. The business valuation had been formally reappraised, and the growth attributed to premarital assets versus marital period contribution was clearly documented. I also had a meeting with my financial advisor, a man named Gerald Shoup, who'd been managing my accounts for years. "She's still on the joint brokerage?" he asked. "For now," I said. "What are we looking at timeline-wise?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "I'm watching." Gerald nodded and didn't push further. He printed off a statement and handed it across the desk. "This is what the joint account looks like right now," he said. "And this," he placed a second sheet next to it, "is what your individual position looks like after the trust consolidation." I studied them side by side for a long moment. "Healthy," I said. "Very," Gerald said. "The thing about a marriage falling apart quietly is that from the outside, nothing looks wrong." We still attended her colleague's birthday dinner together in late October. She introduced me the way she always had, hand on my arm, warm smile, easy familiarity. I played the part too. I'm not going to pretend I was cold or distant at that dinner. I was charming, attentive, the same version of myself I'd always been in public. And afterward, in the car on the way home, she looked at me and said, "You were really on tonight." "I'm always on," I said. She laughed softly. It was the most natural moment we'd shared in weeks. And when we got home, she went upstairs to the guest room, and I went to the master, and the moment passed like smoke. It was around the 6th week that I started to notice something shift in her. The lightness she'd described seemed to have a ceiling. She started checking the mail before I did. She started asking casual questions about finances. Things like, did we already pay the car insurance this month? And what does our monthly budget look like right now? She'd never asked those questions before. In 5 years of marriage, I had handled almost every financial detail. The mortgage, the utilities, the investment contributions, the insurance premiums. All of it ran through me like a quiet machine she never had to think about. She hadn't thought about it. Until now. One evening she came into the kitchen while I was cooking and leaned against the counter in a way that I recognized. She was building up to something. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure," I said, stirring. "Are we still? Are the accounts the same?" she asked. I looked at her. "What do you mean?" I said. "I mean the joint account," she said. "I went to transfer money for my yoga membership, and it was lower than I expected. I moved some of the excess into a separate account I'm managing," I said. She frowned slightly. "When did you do that?" "Few weeks ago," I said. "Should I have been notified?" she asked. I put the spoon down and turned to face her fully. "The joint account still has enough for shared household expenses," I said. "But I've been reallocating the surplus on my end. I figured with the space arrangement, we're each managing our own budgets more independently." She stared at me. "That seems like a big decision to make alone," she said. "You made a pretty big decision alone 3 weeks ago," I said quietly. She didn't have a response for that. She stood there for a second, then left the kitchen without another word. I want to explain something here, because I know how this might sound. I was not being vindictive. I was not punishing her. What I was doing was taking her at her word. She had said she wanted space, meaning distance, independence, less entanglement. Well, entanglement has a financial side too. You can't ask for emotional separation and then expect financial merging to continue on exactly the same terms. That's not how real independence works. That's not how real anything works. And she was about to learn that the hard way. November arrived. She planned a long weekend trip with Cassie to a coastal town about 3 hours away. She mentioned it almost casually. "Cassie and I are doing a girls' weekend. We leave Friday." "That sounds nice," I said. "I figured I'd just use the joint card for the hotel," she said. I looked up at her. "That's fine," I said. "But just so you know, I've set a monthly cap on joint account discretionary spending while we're in this arrangement. Personal trips would come out of personal funds." Her expression shifted immediately. "What cap?" she said. "We're not running like a fully merged household right now," I said, keeping my voice completely even. "You wanted separation. Separation means individual financial responsibility for individual choices." "You're serious?" she said. "Completely," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "You've been planning this," she said. "I've been adjusting," I said. "It feels like you've been waiting," she said, and her voice had an edge now. "Brooke," I said, and it was the first time I'd used her name in that particular tone. "You sat across our dinner table and told me you needed space." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I said, "Okay." All I've done since then is take you seriously. She opened her mouth, closed it. "The trip is fine," I said. "Just use your personal card." She walked out of the room, and I heard her on the phone with Cassie within about 4 minutes. She went on the trip. I had a quiet weekend alone in the house for the first time in years. I worked on Saturday morning, ate what I wanted, watched a documentary that she would have complained about, and slept in the middle of the bed. It was genuinely peaceful. And that peacefulness scared me a little, not because anything was wrong, but because it confirmed something I'd been slowly admitting to myself. I didn't miss her the way I used to. I missed the version of us from the first 2 years, when she would steal food off my plate and call me in the middle of a workday just to tell me something funny she'd read. I missed that person. I didn't miss who she'd become. And I don't know when those two things became different people, but they had. She came back Sunday evening quieter than she'd left. I made tea, asked if she had a good time. She said yes. We watched TV on opposite ends of the couch. At some point she fell asleep. I turned off the television, put a blanket over her, and went to bed. I remember standing in the hallway for a second, looking back at her, and feeling something complicated. Not anger, not resentment, just a kind of heavy sadness for something that used to be very good and had quietly become very empty. Then I went to bed. The first real conversation happened in mid-November. She knocked on the home office door on a Tuesday evening, which she almost never did. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "Yeah," I said and waved her in. She sat down across from my desk, not on the couch in the corner, but in the actual chair across from me, which felt deliberate. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" I said. "About the arrangement," she said. "About what it actually means." I waited. "I think I may have asked for space without fully thinking through what space means," she said. "Okay," I said carefully. "I'm in emotional space," she said. "Like, room to breathe." I didn't mean, like, full separation. I studied her face. "What's the difference, from your perspective?" I asked. She shifted in the chair. "I mean, I didn't want us to become strangers," she said. "I wanted us to be less in each other's faces. Less routine. Not," she gestured at the air, "this." "What is this?" I said. "I don't know," she said quietly. "It feels like you've completely detached." "I took you at your word," I said. "Maybe I didn't use the right words," she said. I was quiet for a moment. "Brooke," I said slowly, "you told me you needed space. You moved into the guest room without a conversation. You started keeping your own schedule without any discussion. I didn't fight any of it. I respected what you said you needed. If what you actually needed was something different, that would have required a different conversation." She looked down at her hands. "Are you angry?" she asked. "No," I said honestly. "You seem distant," she said. "I'm exactly as distant as you asked me to be," I said. She didn't have a response to that. December hit, and with it came the holidays and the quiet financial pressures that the holidays always bring. She mentioned, somewhat stiffly, that she'd been covering more of her personal expenses than she was used to. She said it like an observation, not a complaint. I received it the same way. "That's how it works when you're operating more independently," I said. "I get that," she said. "I just wasn't. I didn't budget for this year-end." "I can help you put together a budget if you want," I said. She looked at me like I'd suggested something bizarre. "I know how to budget," she said. "I know you do," I said. "I'm just offering." She declined, naturally. But 2 days later she asked me, somewhat casually, what I usually put aside for the December credit card bills. Mine or the joint account? I asked. She paused. "Both, I guess," she said. I walked her through it simply and without drama. She listened carefully, and I watched her expression shift as the numbers settled. She had been, for 5 years, living inside a financial cushion she never had to think about. Now she was thinking about it. A lot. There was something uncomfortable about watching that happen. Not satisfying. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't the kind of thing that felt like a win. It felt more like watching someone realize they've been swimming in shallow water their whole life, and the first time they step into the deep end, there's no drama, just a sudden, cold awareness that the bottom isn't where they thought it was. She had never been reckless with money. She was smart, capable, educated. She'd simply never had to apply those capabilities to our household finances because I had never asked her to. That was on me just as much as it was on her. And for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't detachment or resolve. I felt something closer to regret, not for the decisions I'd made, but for the years I'd spent building a system that made her dependent without either of us realizing it was happening. Christmas came and went. We spent Christmas Eve at her parents' house, played the part of a couple, ate too much food, smiled in photos. On the drive home, she was quiet. "What are you thinking about?" she asked at some point. Nothing in particular, I said. You've been really quiet lately, she said. I've always been relatively quiet, I said. Not like this, she said. I didn't respond. She looked out the passenger window at the dark road. Do you even still want this? She asked softly. I kept my eyes on the road. I've been asking myself that question for a while, I said. She turned to look at me. And, she said, I want a real marriage, I said. I've always wanted that. Whether we still have the foundation to build one, I honestly don't know anymore. She was silent for the rest of the drive. January is when it started to fully unravel. She got hit with a credit card bill that was larger than she'd expected. She'd spent freely through November and December the way she always had. But now those expenses were sitting in her personal account instead of being absorbed invisibly into our merged finances. She came to me on a Thursday morning looking more vulnerable than she'd let herself look in months. I'm in a situation, she said simply. I looked up from my coffee. What kind of situation? I said. She put a credit card statement on the counter between us. I looked at it. That's a big number, I said. I know, she said. What happened? I said. I overspent, she said. The holidays, the trips, some things I bought that I didn't need. I wasn't thinking. She said that last part quietly. She wasn't thinking. That, right there, was the honest truth of it. She had not been thinking. I want to talk about what I noticed in that moment, because it's important. When she put that statement on the counter, her eyes were watching me, watching to see if I would just fix it, the way I always had. There had been a version of me that would have taken that piece of paper, folded it, put it in my pocket, and said, don't worry about it. The version of me from 2 years ago, or even a year ago, that version would have absorbed the problem silently, paid the bill, and never mentioned it again, because keeping the peace was something I'd been very, very good at. Maybe too good at, for too long. But that version of me had been doing a lot of thinking over the past 4 months. And that version had left the building somewhere around October. I'm happy to talk through options with you, I said. She blinked. Options, she repeated. I can lend you the money, I said. We could set up a repayment structure. Or I can help you look at what to cut from your monthly spending so this doesn't happen again. Either works. She stared at me. A repayment structure, she said slowly. Or a gift, if you want to think of it that way, I said. But if it's a gift, it should come with a conversation about what's happening between us, because I'm not going to keep funding a lifestyle and a marriage that's been on pause for 4 months. She looked like I'd said something in a language she didn't recognize. I can't believe you're talking to me like this, she said. How would you prefer I talk to you? I said. Like my husband, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I felt that. I want to be honest, I felt it. It hit somewhere real. But I also kept my voice even when I said, I have been your husband. Fully, completely, for 5 years. And you told me in October that you needed space from all of that. So I gave you space. The space includes this part too. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet. I didn't want this, she said. You wanted space? I said simply. This is space. Here's the part one should have explained earlier, the part that reframes everything. The conversation in October wasn't the first time she'd pulled away. It was the third. The first time had been 18 months earlier, when she came home from a company retreat talking about personal reinvention and spent about 6 weeks acting like our marriage was a cage she'd accidentally locked herself into. That time, I'd been the one who chased. I'd planned trips, had long conversations late into the night, made gestures, wrote letters, actual handwritten letters because I'd read that it meant something. She came back around, said she'd just been going through something, said the retreat had put ideas in her head. I forgave all of it without making her earn that forgiveness. The second time was about 8 months after that. Less dramatic, more of a slow withdrawal, fewer conversations, more evenings on her phone. That one resolved itself quietly when a project at work picked up, and she got busy and came back to herself. I absorbed that one too, silently, without ever saying, I noticed you left for a while. By the time October came, I was done absorbing. I had spent 18 months quietly carrying the weight of a marriage that only one of us seemed committed to maintaining. And when she asked for space the third time, I made a decision. I was done catching her. She could have the space. She could have all of it. And then she could decide, with full clarity and no safety net, whether she actually wanted what she'd been stepping away from. Victor called me in mid-January with an update on the post-nuptial paperwork. Everything was in order. The restructuring was complete. What do you want to do now? He asked. I'll let you know, I said. You know if she contests any of this, he started. She won't contest it, I said. How do you know? He asked. Because she doesn't even know what she has yet, I said quietly. Victor was quiet for a moment. Let me know when you're ready to move, he said. I will, I said. A week later, she knocked on the office door again. This time she sat on the couch in the corner, not the chair across from the desk. It was a softer posture, more open. I recognized it. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said. Yeah, I said. About what I actually wanted when I asked for space, she said. And I think I was confusing space with, I don't know, escape. Like something was wrong, and I thought putting distance between us would fix it. And I said, it didn't fix anything, she said. It just made everything more obvious. I looked at her. What became obvious? I said. She tucked her feet under her on the couch the way she does when she's being real. That I've been really selfish, she said. I didn't agree or disagree. I just let her talk. I took for granted how much you handled, she said. All of it. The house, the finances, the planning. I just floated inside all of that and complained about feeling caged. And that was, she stopped. That wasn't fair. No, I said. It wasn't. I'm sorry, she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. I sat with that for a long moment. An apology. After 4 months. After 3 rounds of withdrawal over the past year and a half. After the dinner table, after the guest room, after the coastal trip, after the credit card bill. After all of it. An apology. I want to be honest here about what I felt in that moment. I felt something. Something real and complicated that moved around in my chest in a way I hadn't expected. Part of me wanted to close the distance between us on that couch and just say, okay, let's start over. Part of me wanted to fold. The same part that had always folded. The part that had chased after her the first time, absorbed the second time, said, okay, across the dinner table the third time. But there was another part, a quieter part, one that had grown stronger over 4 months of watching and planning and sitting with my own thoughts. And that part knew something important. An apology is a beginning, not an ending. And I had been accepting apologies as endings for too long. I appreciate that, I said carefully. I genuinely do. She looked up at me with something hopeful in her eyes. But I have to be honest with you, I said. I have made some significant decisions over the past 4 months. Her expression shifted. What kind of decisions? She said. I stood up and walked to the filing cabinet by the window. I pulled out a folder and sat down on the couch, not too close to her, but not across the room. I put the folder between us. She looked at it. This is a post-nuptial agreement, I said. My attorney drafted it in October, and it formalizes some financial restructuring I've done since then. Several accounts have been moved into individual structures. The business is clearly documented as a separate asset. The house has a new appraisal on record. She stared at the folder like it was something alive. You've been planning to divorce me, she said. No, I said. I've been protecting myself in case you decided to. She was quiet for a long time. Do you know what the hardest part of this has been? I said. She shook her head slightly. Not the distance, I said. Not the guest room. Not the weekends away. Not watching you come alive in a way you hadn't been around me in over a year. I paused. The hardest part was realizing that I had made myself so easy to take for granted that you didn't even know you were doing it. She put her hand over her mouth. I ran the house, I said. I ran the finances. I planned the vacations. I handled the insurance. I remembered every renewal date and every due date and every appointment. I did all of that silently because I thought that was what a good partner did. And what I got back was a woman who felt caged. She was crying now, quietly, not dramatically. I'm not saying that to hurt you, I said. I'm saying it because it's true, and we can't fix anything if we don't say the true things out loud. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What does this mean? She asked, nodding at the folder. What do you want? I picked up the folder and set it aside. I haven't filed anything, I said. I haven't served you with anything. The restructuring is protective, not punitive. But it stays in place unless you and I have a very different kind of conversation than we've had for the past year. What kind of conversation? She asked. An honest one, I said. One where we talk about what actually went wrong, not just about your need for space, but about the pattern. This isn't the first time you've pulled away from this marriage. She looked down. I know, she said. And every time you did, I chased, I said. I adjusted, I accommodated, I made myself smaller so you had more room. And it never actually helped. It just trained you to believe that I'd always catch you. She didn't deny any of it. I'm not going to be that person anymore, I said. If you want to be in this marriage, actually in it, I need to know that we're both here by choice. Not inertia, not comfort. not convenience. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her face that I hadn't seen in a very long time. She looked like she was seeing me. Not the easy version, not the accommodating version, not the one who folded when she pulled. Just me. I want to be here, she said. I need to know if you mean that, I said. I mean it, she said. Then say it like it cost you something, I said quietly. She was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Steadier. More weight behind it. I've been running from something that I couldn't name, she said. And I kept running toward you and then away from you, and I told myself it was about needing freedom. But honestly, I think I was scared of how much I had. I stayed quiet. Not the money, she said quickly. Not the house. I mean you. I think I was scared of how steady you were. How reliable. Because at some point I stopped seeing that as a gift and started seeing it as, I don't know, a given. She took a slow breath. And I think when things are a given, you stop being grateful for them, she said. And I stopped being grateful a long time ago. We sat there for a long time after that. The office was quiet except for the sounds of the house settling around us. She didn't ask me to put the folder away. I didn't offer. That folder was real. That folder was the consequence of her choices, and both of us knew it. What happens next? She finally asked. Couples counseling, I said. Not optional. Not something we do for a few months, and then stop when things feel better. I need us to be doing actual work with someone who can hold us both accountable. She nodded. Okay. And this has to be real, I said. Not a temporary reset. Not until the next time something feels hard and you need space. If we do this, we do it all the way. I understand, she said. I also need you to understand something about the financials, I said. She looked at me. The restructuring I've done, some of it stays, I said. Not to punish you, but because I'm not going back to a situation where I'm carrying everything alone while you float. We split the household responsibilities. We split the financial visibility. You're going to know what's in every account and why, and you're going to have an actual role in managing our financial life together. She blinked. That sounds like more work for me, she said carefully. It is, I said. Welcome to actual partnership. She almost laughed. Not a real laugh, more like the exhale version of one. That's fair, she said. The counselor we found was a woman named Dr. Ferrara. She was no nonsense, asked sharp questions, and didn't let either of us off the hook. In our first session, she spent 45 minutes just listening. She barely said a word. She let us each describe our version of the past year, and I noticed, quietly from across the couch, how different our two accounts sounded. Not contradictory, just incomplete in different places. Like two people describing the same building from opposite sides of the street. In our second session, she asked Brooke directly what she'd thought would happen when she asked for space. Brooke hesitated. I thought he'd fight for me, she said. And when he didn't? Dr. Ferrara said. Brooke glanced at me before answering. I was relieved at first, she admitted. And then I was scared. What scared you? Dr. Ferrara asked. Brooke was quiet for a moment. He didn't need me the way I thought he did, she said. And I realized I'd been counting on that. I'd been counting on being needed. Dr. Ferrara looked at me then. What did you take away from that? She asked. That she confused being relied on with being loved? I said. Both women were quiet. Dr. Ferrara wrote something down. And what about you? She said to me. What role did you play in building that dynamic? I looked at the ceiling for a second. I made it too easy to take me for granted, I said. I absorbed everything. I never pushed back, never said, I'm struggling, never made her sit with the consequences of her choices. I thought that was love. I think it was fear. Fear of what? Dr. Ferrara asked. Fear of losing her, I said. So I kept making myself indispensable. Quietly, without asking for anything in return. And eventually indispensable just became invisible. Dr. Ferrara set her pen down and looked at us both. What you've built, she said carefully, is a marriage where one person carried and one person floated. Neither of you designed it that way deliberately, but both of you maintained it. She let that sit in the room for a long moment. The work isn't just repairing what broke, she said. The work is not rebuilding the same structure. Because if you rebuild the same structure, you get the same collapse. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. I wrote it in the back of my legal pad that night. Not the same structure. Real, consistent, sometimes brutally uncomfortable counseling. There were sessions where I left feeling hollow. There were sessions where she cried in the parking lot before we could even get to the car. There were 2 sessions where we sat in silence for so long that Dr. Ferrara had to redirect us both. But we kept going. And something happened over those months that I hadn't been sure was still possible. We started talking like real people again. Not roommates. Not strangers managing shared assets. Not two people performing the choreography of a marriage. Actual, honest, sometimes difficult, sometimes tender conversations. In March, about 5 months after the counseling started, she sat across from me at the same dinner table where she'd asked for space. She put a piece of paper between us. I looked at it. It was a budget she'd made. A real one, itemized, organized. The household expenses split clearly down the middle, her personal expenses accounted for, a savings contribution she was proposing to take on. I made this, she said simply. I looked it over carefully. It was good. It was actually very good. You did this yourself? I said. I used that budgeting software you mentioned in October, she said. I've been learning. I looked up at her. This is solid, I said. I know, she said, and she didn't say it arrogantly. She said it like someone who'd worked hard at something and knew it. Thank you, I said. She nodded. I wanted you to see it, she said. Not because I need you to approve it, but because I want us to be looking at the same picture. I folded the paper carefully and put it inside the cover of the legal pad I always keep on the table. Same picture, I said. Yes. I never told her about every detail of the restructuring. Victor and I had a conversation in February about what to maintain and what to roll back as the marriage showed genuine signs of recovery. Some things stayed separate. The business, permanently. My premarital investment accounts, permanently. The joint account was restored to a shared account that we both actively managed. And the post-nuptial agreement, modified, not retracted. It now reflected a more equitable structure that we had both read and both signed voluntarily. She sat with Victor on her own, with her own legal counsel reviewing it. Her attorney suggested a few modifications. We negotiated them like adults. And then we both signed. It was, in many ways, the most real and honest document our marriage had ever produced. Here's what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. Distance is not a solution. It never was. It's a diagnostic. When she asked for space, I could have begged. I could have panicked, spiraled, accused her of something. Instead, I got quiet, got organized, and let the distance do its job. And what the distance revealed was the truth about her, about me, about the version of this marriage that we'd both been quietly accepting for too long. She had been running from a feeling she hadn't named. I had been enabling a pattern I hadn't confronted. And the space, ironically, painfully, forced both of us to sit with those truths until we couldn't ignore them anymore. There's something else I want to say about the financial piece, because I know that's the part that might make some people uncomfortable. I didn't restructure my assets as punishment. I did it because I'd spent years treating financial generosity as a substitute for emotional honesty. I'd carried everything because carrying everything made me necessary. And I was necessary because necessary felt like loved. But it wasn't. It was a transaction I'd built in secret, and when she asked for space, I finally had the clarity to see it. Real partnership doesn't mean one person disappears into the infrastructure. Real partnership means two people are both accountable, financially, emotionally, practically, for the life they're building together. The budget she put on the table in March was the first genuinely equal thing we'd ever put between us. And it meant more to me than any of the years before it. We're still together. I say that plainly because I know that's what people want to know. We're still together, and it's different than it was. Not the way things are different when they've been broken and imperfectly glued back. Different the way things are different when you've stripped something down to the frame and built it back with better materials. Harder in some ways. She has more responsibility now, and she carries it. I ask for more now, and she shows up. There are still moments when old patterns flicker, when she gets quiet in a way that used to mean withdrawal, or when I catch myself starting to silently absorb something I should say out loud. But we catch it, both of us. And that catching, that moment of recognizing the pattern before it runs, is the work. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make for a clean ending, but it's real. Last month, we were cleaning out the home office together. She found the folder. The original post-nuptial agreement draft, the one I'd placed between us on the couch in January. She held it for a moment, turning it over in her hands. Can I read it? She asked. You already signed a version of it, I said. The original, she said. The one you drafted before I knew. I said yes. She sat on the couch and read it slowly. All of it. When she finished, she closed it and set it on the cushion beside her. You really thought we were over, she said. I thought we might be, I said. I wasn't willing to be destroyed by the possibility. She nodded slowly. I almost destroyed us, she said. We almost destroyed us, I said. in our different ways. She looked at me for a long moment. I'm glad you didn't fold, she said quietly. Yeah, I said. Me too. She handed the folder back. I put it in the filing cabinet and closed the drawer. And then she asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes, and we went to the kitchen together. The truth about this whole experience, the thing that I keep coming back to when I try to make sense of it, is that the moment she asked for space was actually the most honest moment our marriage had ever produced, because it forced a reckoning that we needed. I wasn't a perfect husband before October. I was a man who had learned to love through overfunctioning. And she wasn't a villain. She was a woman who had learned to take safety for granted because it had always been there. Neither of us meant to build what we built, but we built it. And then, in the strange, painful, clarifying way that distance sometimes works, we had to actually choose each other again. Not out of habit, not out of comfort, not because the alternative was too frightening, but because, when everything else was stripped away, we looked at each other clearly and decided yes. Still yes. She said she needed space. I gave it to her. All of it. Every inch. And it turned out that what the space contained, when you took everything comfortable and automatic out of it, was the real question. Do you want this? Not the house. Not the security. Not the soft, invisible infrastructure of a life someone else built around you. Do you want this person? She had to answer that question alone, in the full cold light of what space actually costs. And when she answered yes, she answered it knowing the price. That's the only kind of yes that means anything.